Welcome, everyone. So this is our first session, and it's an introduction to electrical planning reports. Very big thanks to Jennifer Neville, who works with us on a number of the initiatives on EV charging and the electrical updates for buildings. And a special thanks to Lee McFarland from Edwards Electric from Saanich. And he's going to help walk us through some of the technical information that we have. It's a new piece of legislation, new requirement. There are going to be new rules and conditions, so pay attention. There will be updates. Don't take this as the definitive answer, but we will certainly see updates as we go forward. The session is recorded. It will be posted to the CHOA website and our YouTube channel, as well as the presentation and the sample request for proposals that we'll be just referring to as I go along here. And just little technical glitch. There we go. Just a little reminder. It is all of these events try to keep your information to not disclose any personal information in the Q&A. It is an educational program intended to provide you an understanding of what this topic is about, which is electrical planning reports. We would anticipate probably repeating these sessions once or twice through the coming year as we get a little bit more awareness of what the issues are, what the challenges are. And of course, one of the great big issues is going to be how the implementation is starting to roll out with strata corporations. Just want to give you a little bit of a plug for spring seminars. They are going to be interesting in the sense that they're going to deal with a lot of the frontline issues that we're dealing with as strata corporations. So bullying and harassment is just over the top for most property managers, most strata councils, and we really need to be developing some tools of management for this. Electrical planning reports, obviously, we're going to do some basically step-by-step, how did a townhouse community do it? What were the things they looked for? How did a bare land do it? What are the things they look for? And we're going to give some conceptual idea of how these are going to look, because I doubt anyone is going to have done these yet, but it's great to have a little bit of a case study on how you would anticipate the issues. And then the last thing is complicated insurance issues. With last year's fires and with this winter's major freeze and the major claims, we have a significant number of strata corporations with overwhelming claims that they're having to deal with. And so we want to actually walk through what these significant claims look like and how they're managed and the role and responsibility of the strata corporation. So they're all on the website now. Take a minute and just go right into it and deal with it. The introduction of vehicle charging stations, in-suite heat pumps, all of the components that we have increased electrical services dramatically. It's the reason why there is the need for electrical planning and capacity. The strata corporations across the province, from bare lands all the way to large high-rise buildings, newer and older, are already experiencing capacity problems for power in their buildings. So it has to be managed. There are ways to manage it. And the way you manage it, first off, is to know what you have for electricity. So Jennifer, I'm just going to hand it over to you, and you can walk people through the regulations as we know them so far.
Okay, terrific. What is Bill 22? So on May 11th, 2023, the Strata Property Act was amended to address electric vehicle issues. In 30 seconds or less, I'm going to tell you it did a couple of things. It changed the voting threshold to approve and pay for EV charging infrastructure. It went from 3/4 to a majority vote. It increased the amount of time that an owner can have exclusive use of a parking stall. So it went in accordance with the regs. It's now 5 years. It also prevented a strata corporation from unreasonably refusing to approve EV charging infrastructure. So that's my 30 seconds. If you want to know more about that, I wrote an article for the CHOA Journal for the summer 2023. Check out that article. The regulations are now effective They were effective December 2023. Here today, we're talking about electrical planning reports. The reports, they evaluate electrical usage, capacity, and current and future demands. And Lee's going to detail all of those things later in this session. And they apply, this is important, they apply to strata corporations of 5 units or more. Next slide. Oh, yeah. So it applies to all zones of BC, including rural communities. It's required for all types. So high-rise, townhouses, bare land strata, industrial and commercial strata, leasehold stratas, recreational use, etc. What are the deadlines? So this is important. Two separate deadlines. So the first one is December 31st, 2026. And that relates to the Capital Regional District, the Fraser Valley Regional District, and the Metro Vancouver Regional District. They're all listed on the slide there. The other deadline is December 31st, 2028. So if your Strata Corporation is in Vancouver, you need to have your EPR done by December 31st, 2026. If your Strata Corporation is in Kelowna, it needs to be by December 31st, 2028. Now, there's no specific penalty for failing to meet the deadline, but there are significant consequences, and this is something that strata corporations should be aware of. So Section 90.1 of the Strata Property Act allows an owner to request approval for the installation of EV infrastructure. And they have the right to do that request on the earlier of the date the electrical planning report was required, and the date that it was obtained. So the consequence is that's a trigger. When they make that request, the Strata Corporation has 3 months from that time to decide. Um, and 90.2 sub 4 says the Strata Corporation can't unreasonably refuse. So importantly, and this is me speculating on what this civil resolution tribunal would do, but I would say if I've lost you here, perk up for the moment as a Strata Corporation. Don't get caught without a report, because I think the CRT would say if you didn't have a report, you failed to. It was an unreasonable refusal for approval, and Strata Corporations will get caught. So listen up, listen to Lee as well. I think it's really important for Strata Corporations to make sure they get those reports well in advance of the deadlines. So how do we identify what is required? So we look at regulation 5.11, and we're going to have another slide on that with some more detail in just a little bit. Strata corporations need to remember they have to give an access to the provider of to the preparer of the report. They need to enable the report completion, and it's wise to make sure that they do that in a way that's going to reduce the cost. So don't make your engineer or your electrician search for it. Have it there, have it ready. Make sure that they get it promptly. And the EPR is going to evaluate current demands and potential demands for conversions. So I personally was really happy to see this requirement in the Strata Property Act, because it really encourages strata corporations to plan. So they're not being forced to make decisions without information. And that's important for electric vehicles. It's also important for heat pumps and other demands on electricity. Now, my horror story is years ago, I was working with a Strata Corporation that just had the first early adopter of an electric vehicle install whatever charging station they wanted to. And that person actually used all of the electrical capacity for the Strata Corporation. And then when someone tried to install an oven, it made a huge problem. So having the EPR is, in my opinion, just a really good way for the Strata Corporation to plan. Okay, frequency and record keeping. So right now, the EPR is a one-time evaluation. So you have the obligation to get it that one time by your applicable date. It's important to note that it must be maintained as a record of the Strata Corporation. So in other words, under Section 35, you have to keep a copy of it, and an owner or tenant can request a copy of it under Section 36. It also needs to be attached to the Form B information certificate. So that's going to inform purchasers as well as lenders with regard to information for the Strata Corporation. Now, some people may be asking, how do you pay for it? And that's something else that was included in the Strata Property Act amendments as of May of last year as well. You can pay from your contingency reserve fund under Section 96 of the Strata Property Act, and it's going to be a majority vote resolution. Now, who can do an EPR? Next slide, please. Okay, so for Part 9 buildings, and you might be asking, what is a Part 9 building? So that's buildings that are 3 stories or less, and with a building footprint of 6,458 square feet or less. And so for Part 9 buildings, you have 3 opportunities for experts to do it. It could be a professional engineer, it could be an applied science technologist, or it could be a journey person. Uh, that's a sort of a break for smaller buildings. With the larger buildings, it has to be either a professional engineer or a registered appliance science technologist. And same dates apply for everybody, of course. Um, so I haven't seen an electrical planning report yet. I'm interested to see what they're going to look like. I do really think though it's going to be a really nice opportunity for proactive strata corporations to plan. And I have a show article coming out in the journal next time. It's going to talk about how I think the CRT is going to approach these kinds of applications. I suspect we'll see a lot of applications in the CRT regarding electrical planning reports in the next year or two. So, what must be contained in the report?
I
So
think we
it's got
go
to
over
have,
to Lee. I think we go over to Lee now, Jennifer.
okay, please.
Am I correct? No, one more slide.
One more slide. Yeah.
There you go.
Thanks.
I was just gonna say the one little addition that I put on the previous slide was that no, you cannot exempt yourselves from an electric planning report. There is no 3/4 vote exemption in spite of the fact that seems to be traveling around out there.
Yeah, so Tony, I hear there was a rumor throughout BC that was suggesting that a person could have a resolution to exempt themselves, similar to what the depreciation reports do. That is incorrect. Let's nip that rumor in the bud. So everybody must have an electrical planning report if they have more than 5 strata lots in the strata corporation. So what needs to be in the report? You need to have, of course, the date of the report, the name of the person who provided the report. You need to have the qualifications of that person. You need to have errors and omissions insurance, if any, and you need to have the relationship, if any, between the strata corporation and the person preparing the report.
Okay, now we go over to Lee. My page numbers disappeared. I don't know how that happened, but there we go.
No problem. Good morning, everyone. So from our perspective, the EPR is fairly straightforward, even though there is a lot of initial groundwork and research to ensure the EPR providers captured all of your electrical systems and information in the EPR. The following slide lists are from the section 5.11 in a lot of cases of what must include. So the current electrical capacity is bullet 1 here that must analyze the physical system, ensuring we're looking at all levels of capacity from your individual suite units all the way to metering closets to main distribution and potentially to strata-owned unit substations. Bullet 2 is then we get into the existing electrical demands of your buildings and property, including potentially elevators, large loads, EV charging, heating, cooling, ventilating, lighting systems, and so on. And then we're looking at also your current peak demand and spare capacity, if any. So your actual usage, of course, is much different than the requirements at the time of your building's initial design. And our utilities have tools for engineers and electricians to use and to analyze what you actually use and compare this to your system to provide a sense of available power. Next slide. So if applicable, an estimate of electrical capacity required to power systems such as heating, cooling, ventilation, anything that's currently powered by an energy source other than electricity. So there are many gas or oil systems that will need to be retrofitted in the future. So this point in our analysis presents an estimate of the power required for that transition to review that and include it in any upstream power needed all the way to utility connection potentially. So for example, what would the estimated electrical equivalent be for a townhome that has gas furnaces in the units if they were to be converted to electrical equivalent? Next slide. So we also look at an estimate of the electrical capacity needed for future anticipated demands. So that includes potentially heating and cooling, potentially air systems, hot water systems, and other systems that your strata is considering that the EPR provider may not know about. So this is something that your strata has to provide to your provider, including potential EV charging infrastructure that will be required and by your owners, as Jennifer and Tony mentioned. So it's important your strata provides these future details because the EPR writer is not specifying the exact model of hot water boiler that you may have in place to replace a like model gas boiler system, but more so the kilowatts required for this potential. So in this step here, we're also looking at that the Strata Corporation can take to reduce the demands on the electrical capacity by converting a lot of their existing lighting systems to LED, maybe installing some solar systems on the building. Energy management can be considered for that monitors your building usage and reduces power for EV charging at peak load periods or for time of use potentially, and also heating, cooling, and other efficiencies that you may have in extreme periods. There is solutions to this, and this is what the report would discuss. Next slide. And then we're into we're looking at the upgrades or modifications that the electrical systems could be undertaken to increase the capacity of this electrical system. So there is many ways to alter existing systems with minimal effort. So for example, in older buildings, there may be an opportunity to take advantage of capacity of existing equipment. There may be solutions where a panel board has the capacity, but the feeder wire and the breaker previous was limited for some reason. So there is a low cost opportunity to upgrade that part of the system. So this is also what the EPR should be looking at. Does your building have antiquated equipment that is due for replacement? So for example, in your previous depreciation reports, has it specified that you're looking to replace this anyways? Is this then something that the provider, the EPR, should know so that they can recommend, well, maybe you should just tweak that plan a little bit so that you have a little extra power in that sense. And then of course, we want to definitely look at what is available from your provider in the area. Most of the time, the utilities are saying it is under their purview. If you're under your intended capacity, they will upgrade what's required, but sometimes that's not necessarily the case. So that's something that the EPR would want to look at. Next slide. And then the last thing that the report really evaluates is the estimate of electrical capacity that's made available after these energy savings or alterations are made. So I am, always reminding our clients that the EPR is meant to be a gateway to the understanding of your systems that exist. It is also to provide this sense of magnitude for your power usage. And in most cases, you will then be able to use this information in an EPR to then request further studies for specific equipment, such as transitioning to those heat pumps or looking at EV-ready infrastructure design. So there is always the possibility that your strata may request specific details while the EPR is being produced by the writer producer, if they have the capability of this work. But a provider of an EPR may not have the expertise of heating and cooling, for example. So you would want to make sure that that work is done separate to the EPR. Specific information, it's not required in the EPR and shouldn't be in the EPR. It's important to understand that the EPR is a certain function that is to produce the certain information that is laid out in the Strat Act and no more. Thank you. Oh, I guess I have a little more to talk about. So what does an EPR, yeah, go ahead, next slide, please. So what does an EPR provider need to understand your building and your strata? They are doing a bit of a deep dive into your electrical and alternative energy systems that frankly may never have been done before. So understanding your property yourselves as best as possible before you hire an EPR is recommended, and your strata will most likely need to assign a representative to be the liaison with that EPR provider. So as you see, there's many stratas that apply under this requirement for the EPR. So it's important to understand what you are and where you are. Next slide. And we all have to remember that the EPR has never been produced, like Tony has mentioned, previous to December 6, 2023. It's new for the industry, but EPR providers, including ourselves, do have the experience of these types of reports and should be able to provide guidance as to what you need as a strata. So those items that may be included that we require is a copy of your strata plan, anything that you have as a strata, such as architectural, mechanical, electrical drawings, description of your systems in your building, including all your heating, your current EV charging system, and so on and so forth, as well as all your alternative energy systems, such as the oil, gas, or propane systems. Next slide. And your strata should anticipate a site visit, which will require full access to your property. So that's very important because we need to review your electrical rooms, ensure that the actual equipment is truly what it says. A lot of times what you may have in a plan isn't actual what's in there in reality, or it has changed over the years potentially. So we need to see all electrical closets, mechanical systems, rooftop systems, parking areas, and of course, any alternative energy systems. We will also have to review one or more of your suites to inspect that the suite panel is truly what it should be. And if you have different size suites, such as bachelor to penthouse, well, we have to investigate that and what is actually installed for their particular heat pump and so on. This is detail that's fairly specific, but if you want a good EPR, you need to be aware that this is a potential that we need access to. Next slide. And of course, last documents, you should be aware as a strata to provide are things such as your utility billing statements. Usually the EPR provider provides the pathway and the instruction of how to get your utility historical usage, what's called in BC Hydro terms as a load report, those sort of things. And sometimes for buildings or for stratas that have townhomes, the EPR provider may need to have engagement with not just the strata as a whole, but the individual owners to try to achieve and try to receive that load report from individual owners themselves, because no one has access to that besides the actual owners in every suite. So not just your strata has to be aware to be able to participate, but your owners may have to be needed for that purpose. And of course, most buildings or a lot of buildings that are stratas do require an electrical operating permit, even though you may not have it or you may not understand what it is, but that does have a logbook that records all the electrical system upgrades and changes that have been made. So it's very important to understand where that is to provide for the EPR.
Thanks, Lee. I was just going to go back to that. The electric operating permit logbook is an elusive document for almost every strata corporation, and most of them don't have their electrical permits for operating anyhow, which is another whole issue that we're starting to tackle with in the province. So it's going to be, I think, a bit of a catch up for many of these communities as we go forward. So just a few quick slides on getting ready and start your planning process. We have time. If you start now, you have a reasonable amount of time before the end of 26 or 28, depending on your location. So, you can start your planning process now. We are assembling, this is a big question, we're assembling as best as we can a list of offices, companies, and consultants across the province that you'll be able to access and use as a screening process to be able to start commissioning requests for reports. We have to start somewhere where our office is in as much a new concept as everybody else. You can issue a request for services or request for proposals to start the process. You're going to want to know specific things like delivery times and costs, The longer you wait, the closer we get to 26 and 28, the more crunch it's going to be. The costs will rise, I'm sure, as they always do on this time frame, and the number of service providers may or may not increase, so we may have some delays in crunch. The other thing is do some surveys of your owners. Who wants EV charging at this time? It's at this time. And then from that, you can extrapolate what the future might look like at the same time. What about heat pump upgrades? And heat pump upgrades in suites, if they are cooling and heating, will require some conversions within the units, as well as alteration agreements and all of the impact to building exterior systems. So, there's a fair amount of work involved with all that. We do have some prototype planning models coming out this summer, as we're going through some significant upgrades and changes already with a few buildings. So, look for those as we get ready for the summer journal. We'll have some great samples in that. And then you can set the item in your annual budget or your depreciation report. Either one, it's a majority vote. It is a one-time expense, but we continue to draw money from our reserve funds and we continue to deplete them. So think about that. You can spend this certainly from your reserve contributions. But if you do that, try to offset that cost as we go forward to reduce the constant decline of reserve funds that we have. Sample RFP, we've got it posted. It'll be on the website. You can use it. You can modify it. If you have any great ideas or additions that you think we should add that might be more helpful for consumers, send us an email so we can update it. It will certainly be changed and updated as we go along. Review the items that might be unique to your strata corporation. We talk about all the normal things, but a lot of strata corporations have pools and hot tubs, and almost all of those are heated with gas heating, and there's a real push to get them off of gas and onto heat pumps. The capacity that's needed for those is substantial, and the amount of power that's going to be drawn is also substantial. So recreation items that are going to go through conversions, they are the kind of things that might be unique to your strata corporation. Look at the delivery capacity from your utility provider. Neighborhood capacity for buildings or for neighborhoods with the utility providers have limitations on them. When the buildings were built, as Lee said, they were built with the planned expected use of those communities at the time. That's what the utility provider was delivering. The difficulty with this is the upgrades are significant in cost. And until we have some sort of revisit from the provincial government around how those upgrades are going to be paid for, at this time, they are the property owners who are paying for the upgrade. So we'll hope for some transition in that area in the near future. Deficiencies in your electrical operating system. This is a great opportunity to be able to ask the planner, the person who's doing the report, are there additional items we should be looking at further consultation on? Are there items that stand out for you? Your depreciation planner is probably not going to be able to identify those, but I'm going to assume that the person who does the electric planning report is going to have the competency to identify at least some deficiencies that you need further consultation and investigation on. Always get everything in writing, right? Just verbal conversations are great, but you send an email after the conversation confirming this is what we talked about, this is what we've agreed to. Always back up in writing what you've been doing, and then remember that these all go on to a Form B. So there are a number of issues you're going to have to remember. Here's the email addresses for the office, for Jennifer, for Lee. So you can just send him an email right now and say, we want to get on your list. And you have my email address as well. By all means, you're welcome to email any of us. I'm sure we'll be passing on a lot of referrals to other parties to give you a better, clearer scope on what you're doing as you move forward. Buildings in intertidal areas that have very large banks of sump pumps are buildings that are going to also be looking at upgrades. Just a little aside, we've had on the Fraser River a building that just did an evaluation of their electrical, not their planning report, because they had some electrical issues, to discover that their sumps were significantly under-designed and underpowered. And so, the demand on electricity has increased fourfold for them just with having to upgrade those systems. So it's a bit of an opportunity to make sure our systems are sufficient, safe, and operating. So Jennifer and Lee, I'll get you guys to unmute. We have a bunch of questions, and I'll surf through the Q&A at the same time. I think, Jennifer, you've probably been doing that, right?
I have.
So first one was easy. As a realistic consultant, we're going to assemble that as much as possible. Please, if you can identify a consultant that you've had experience with that we may have missed, send us an email so we can follow up that process. Lee, I think maybe you should answer the next one, though. Will an EV ready plan satisfy the conditions for an electric planning report?
Yeah, so it's an easy one, I guess, is no, is the answer. And the reason is the EV Ready Plan is a specific document that was created by Clean BC for the purpose of specifically designing one particular option for your building to make all of your units have the access to EV charger. So it's a very specific plan for EV charging. In the EPR, you're looking at a sense of magnitude. So we do, hundreds of EV ready plans, but that's different. But we can take that information and of what we know of your area and what you probably should have as an example for the power required for your EV charging, include that in the EPR. But it's not a full design of your EV charging system that the EV Ready Plan can provide.
Right. Thank you. Which follows into the next one. Would it be wise to marry together the EV Ready Plan and the electrical planning reports? The electrical planning reports have not yet been classified for grants through the municipalities. The EV ready plans have to meet specific terms and conditions, which are not necessarily the same as an electric planning report. And I think we'll hit some middle road on all of that within the next year. But I don't know, Lee, what do you think your take is on that?
Yeah, if I can add to that, yeah. So our pricing is specific to us, right? Every provider will have their own services and whatnot. Because we do all of that work, what we do is, obviously, if we do an EPR, it's looking at your system in detail, your electrical, your building and whatnot, that then can be utilized, that information can be utilized for an EV Ready Plan. So there should be some discounts from your provider if they're able to do both. Now, they're going to be two separate documents. You have to, obviously, I'm talking into Jennifer and Tony's area, you have to vote on them separately, that sort of thing. But if you have a provider that's able to provide both of these types of documents, you can do them at the same time or one after the other.
Sounds like a prudent decision. Jennifer, we're going, you know what's going to happen with everybody is the first question everybody's going to ask is who's going to pay for this, right? So, so we have to do upgrades within units, or we have to do upgrades within the electrical system, whether we're a bareland townhouse or apartment building. I think this comes back to that whole division of what's common property versus what part of a strata lot issue, but who pays?
Well, it's going to be the Strata Corporation. They pay for the electrical planning report, and they're likely going to be paying for costs related to implementing recommendations in the report. There are some scenarios, though, in which, for example, for electric vehicles, that the Strata Corporation can make the owner responsible for the installation of a charging station. So the question of who pays, I hate to say this as a lawyer, but sometimes it's complicated. So in many cases, it's going to be the Strata Corporation. There may be the ability to put some of that onto an owner, depending on the circumstances.
So the follow-up on the backside of that is if the cost for EV infrastructure or an EV ready plan or the electrical planning report is on the agenda for majority vote, but it gets voted down, does that give the council the leverage to be able to refuse requests for EV charging infrastructure?
I mean, it may give them a brief respite from having to make a decision. So there was a decision of the CRT a year or two ago, the Rasmussen decision, and it was related to a heat pump. And what it said was the Strata Council was proactively trying to get some more information so that they could have a bylaw put together to deal with approval of heat pumps, and they wanted to have considerations for whether they could be installed or not. And the CRT said, you haven't unreasonably withheld your approval. But that's a short period of time, right? So with respect to the question of, if you didn't get it approved by a majority vote, my suggestion is, try again, because Strata Corporation is going to need their EPR. So if you don't do it the first time, you have to take it back and you have to explain to owners the risks of not doing it. First, non-compliance with the Strata Property Act, but more importantly, at some point, once you've failed to provide it before the deadline, that's going to create the trigger for an owner being able to request approval. And that's where you're going to have to respond within 3 months. And if you haven't responded, you're probably looking at a dispute with that owner. So I like to work with strata corporations, ideally, who plan. And now, as both you and Lee mentioned, now's the time to plan.
Lee, there's a really good technical question that is, I think, going to be really commonly asked by a bunch of people. This is going to come out of townhouses and bare land stratas predominantly, but it's the EV charger. The EV came with a 12-amp charger. They have a 15-amp circuit in the garage, and they can buy a charger that supports up to 15 amps. That charges about 25% faster from the same outlet. But they've been advised that running a charger at 15 amps on a 15-amp circuit will probably trip the breaker. The other question I'd ask is, how many other items are on that breaker in the garage?
Yeah, and I think I see a lot of Q&As that are very specific questions to your strata, and the question that you're asking is not necessarily what the EPR is intended for. And I think that's what we have to recognize, that the EPR is a sense of magnitude, and a solution for a townhome. It may be very straightforward once we do an EPR that we can show you have power available on that panel, even though it was originally not built that way, but we can prove that through the EPR and say that yes, you do have power available, even though that's not how it was initially built. So that answer can sometimes be within the EPR, but to have potentially a determination that then is for the installation of a charger within a building is separate to an EPR. That's a specific design and a question on that particular unit or the building as a whole. Going back to the EV Ready plan and specific design of a building or like a MURB, let's say, think of it that way. It's separate system to an EPR. It's the same with the townhome or anything like that's looking into specific questions with charging for a particular unit or any of the particular units. Yes, you can get a sense within the EPR, but it might not be exact of what you can legally use for an electrician to work from. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's very good advice. Thank you. So the Regulation 511 has this funny language in it about strata corporation supplied by electricity by utility independent from every other stratas. What that basically means is if your strata unit, so this is probably going to be bare land or a duplex, something like this, but duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes are exempt. But it will be a scenario of probably I can envision a common bare land that has 8 units, all direct facing to the street, where each one of them gets a supply and they don't go through a distribution transformer for their community. So I think that's how that is going to be set out. But many bare lands, unbeknownst to the residents, all have distribution transformers. And from that point, the power is distributed within the community, even though you have 100 amp service in your unit and you get a bill from BC Hydro or from Fortis, that distribution comes out of your distribution transformer that has a capacity to it for your community. And that's where we're starting to face into some challenges. I don't know, can you just expand a little bit, Lee, on the kind of the capacity issues that some of these communities are really going to start to face?
Yeah, so I think what we're talking about is there, there's only so much within our sphere of control as a strata, right? And that's what we're talking about within the EPR. And then potentially you're looking at what Tony is mentioning outside that sphere into the utilities, potential ability to supply you power that you may require. Depending upon your provider that you've worked with, like we have in writing, let's say from BC Hydro, from Fortis or anyone else right now, saying that if you are working within your means that it was originally intended for, it's up to the cost of the utility in BC Hydro's case to upgrade their infrastructure for the purpose of providing power to your system. Now, if you have the unfortunate requirement that you have an older building and even the original intended power that you have available is going to be not sufficient for EV charging and heat pumps and that sort of thing, conversion from alternative energy systems, then you can get into you have that cost potentially of the utility because you are in fact going above the original intent of your property. So it makes sense. You have to look at that cost. So that's what we're talking about here. Does that answer your question, Tony?
Yeah, no, I think it's puts it into perspective for everybody that there are going to be limitations in most of the communities. I think that's a reasonable perspective. Jennifer, there's a question here about, is the reporting document, is there a reporting requirement to the province, or is this a private document of the Strata Corporation? And I wouldn't use the word private document of the Strata Corporation. I would use the term record of the Strata Corporation, perhaps.
Yeah, I would too. There's no reporting requirement to the province, and it is a Strata Corporation record, which is, as we mentioned, can be requested by an owner under Section 36, and also needs to be on the Form B.
The other question I think that we're going to see that comes up significantly is that people I think property owners all have the assumption that because we have a separate meter that we're not part of a distribution system. The meter is only there to capture consumption and billing purposes. That has no indication whether you have a separate a distribution center or not. And in most townhouse complexes and Bearlands, you don't. You have a distribution transformer that delivers power to all of those centers. So again, each property is going to have to be evaluated as you come up with it. But I'm gonna go out on a limb and I'm gonna say 99% of the properties this is going to affect you in some way or another. Lee, I don't want to put you on the spot with this, but is there a ballpark kind of cost people are asking what they should anticipate? So let's say 25 unit townhouse complex versus a 50 unit apartment building.
Sorry, for the cost of the electrical planning report?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we do have set costs for all types of buildings and stratas. Yes. So their provider should have that on hand at your request. Yeah.
And get out there and go to multiple providers if you need to be looking at the costs to get a sense of the estimates. I think it's so early. I don't think it's going to be really easily possible at this point yet to put any kind of block on the cost. But some of the companies like yours do already have some costs that they have attributed to this. Another good question that comes up, this is predominantly on high-rise buildings. A number of the high-rise buildings have transmitters and and cell towers on them that draw significant amounts of power, and they may actually be assigned to a third party in some way. So, and in addition to that, they may not be metered. So how are those evaluated?
Mhm. Well, and I would, if I can just say from an EPR standpoint, it's just to add it to everything else, really. The legality of what the strata chooses to use with that information, such as if we stated that you have so much capacity and you can do everything that you want to do, but because of the cellular tower here, you're getting to your limit or you're going to be over your limit. Well, that's up to your strata now. That's what the EPR provides. Now your strata can make that decision and going, maybe we have to rethink this agreement that we've originally had previous, and that's outside of the EPR's purview.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And they are complicated agreements for the most part. Jennifer, any additional thoughts?
Oh, I'm just thinking about all of the cell tower agreements that I've seen over the years, and typically they're not easy to terminate. So, Tony, you raise a really interesting point for strata corporations that have those cell tower agreements. They may be in for some planning and some challenges.
Yeah, and likewise, we have installers out there for EV charging stations, and we specifically see this in townhouse communities and with Bearlands, where the owner isn't necessarily going to their strata corporation to get any permission. In a townhouse, they probably should be. In a Bearland, that may not have the same requirements, but I think Bearlands need to seriously look at this in their bylaws. But they're getting messages from their service provider that capacity is not an issue. How would any EV installer know what the capacity is without an EV ready plan? I don't know, Lee, how would you estimate that?
Experience. If we've, let's say, a particular strata in an area requests an EPR, we most likely have done many EV ready plans for buildings around their area. So we're able to provide the same information to present a sense of magnitude of the power required for EV charging. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's super. Thank you both. There's a lot of repeat questions throughout all of the Q&As. I didn't see anything that stood out, except I think there's also a concern in one perspective, though, that the public is going to say, well, you know what, government is going to start imposing things like eliminating our gas fireplaces or forcing us to do conversions for hot water tanks and stuff like that. That's not the plan at this point. I will always qualify with at this time, that is not the intention. However, we do have municipalities in British Columbia who are now looking at bylaws for things like conversion of makeup air units. And when they get upgraded or converted, that they have to have heat pumps for electric delivery of cooling air, as well as heating. And in many cases, they're going to have to be hybrid systems. So, I think it's going to be an interesting transformation as we go forward. One more question that keeps coming up over and over again is about load sharing, which especially with EVs in underground parking systems, certainly I think strata corporations need to look at their development of their EV ready plans and look at what the load sharing opportunities are, because that will reduce the demand on the systems, Lee.
Yeah, it's essentially with a proper designed EV charging system, the amount of power that it adds to your complex is effectively zero. With a proper EV EMS, which is energy management system. So it can, if you have the power available, it's kind of a moot point. You don't have to worry about that. But there is a lot of technology out there in all the different types of vendors and chargers available that can reduce your power as needed when you have your peak periods of use.
That's super. I'm just going to put the email slide up once more for everyone. This session has been recorded. It will be posted to the CHOA website and the YouTube channel. Anticipate updated versions of these presentations along with the spring seminars. The PowerPoint will be included. as well as a sample request for proposals, which is an RFP as we go forward. And thank you everyone for attending. It was great to see such a great number out. Share the information, spread it around. We have time now, which is a great opportunity. Don't dawdle. You know, I would start the process at the very earliest, make sure for the fall of this year or early next year, you have the money in your budget or to approve an expense from your contingency reserve fund to start this process and start looking at prices and estimates for what you can do. So Lee, Jennifer, thank